Garry Kasparov is a name that will always ring in the history of chess. But one of the big things that happened with him was he was such a powerful personality. And when he didn't like something, it showed.
Absolutely.
And he didn't like the way the World Championship was being run. So after he beat Karpov, their last
1990.
match, he decided, you know what, it's time to professionalize chess.
That's what he wanted to do.
Let's take the World Championship over.
Right.
Basically, it was a hijacking.
Right.
And when he played against Nigel Short in 1993, it was not under the umbrella of FIDE, but was under the umbrella of the newly created Professional Chess Association, the PCA. And FIDE didn't like that, obviously.
No, they didn't.
Because that was their bread and butter.
Correct.
There was a lot of money, fees that they got extracted from that World Championship match. You were front and center in a lot of the drama that went on.
No question about it, Maurice. I think of the World Championship five matches from 1984 to 1990s, the golden period of chess. And Garry was a real maverick. And keep in mind, each and every one of those matches were multi-million-dollar matches, and FIDE gets 20% of
Nice
the
little
price.
fee off the top.
No question about it. I remember 1987, they had more than 5 million Swiss francs. That's 20% to the FIDE. That's 1 million sweet right there for the FIDE. Garry was a maverick. He was a rebel in the Soviet Union when you didn't think rebels were allowed to be rebels. I mean, wasn't the Soviet Union this one big monolithic organization? It doesn't allow for rebels, but Garry in 1987 wanted to start the Grandmasters Association, the GMA. I was on the board of directors. And he wanted to professionalize the sport, bring in commercial sponsors, and he wanted the chess professionals, the top grandmasters in the world, to take control of their livelihoods and their lives. And that was the GMA. And by the time of 1993 rolls around, Garry's more incensed and more convinced than ever that FIDE is not acting for the good of chess, but literally for its own self, for its own bureaucrats.
By now, he's been champ for 8 years.
Oh, yeah.
So he's got the gravitas. He's a big star, not just a chess star.
He's transcended the sport.
He's transcended the sport, and
That's
people
right.
in the common person is finding out about this guy, Garry Kasparov. His
That's
name
right.
is maybe not Fischer's level, but certainly was a top
Exactly.
star in the general world.
Exactly. I remember an argument broke out in the United Nations Council where the U.S. representative publicly denounced the Soviet ambassador and called him Kasparov. And the Russians laughed and said, no, Kasparov's the chess champion of the world. And it was like, ooh, so Garry was very, very well known. And he had transcended the sport, and there's no question about that. And Garry had some very specific ideas what he wanted to do, and what FIDE was doing was not cool. And then he plays Nigel Short, his first Western challenger. Finally, instead of his perpetual opponent, that's who he called Anatoly Karpov, his perpetual opponent. He had a Western grandmaster from the UK, Nigel Short, and he saw this as a clash of East and West to rival Fischer-Spassky. It never rose to that level of interest. But he wanted to take that match and turn it away from what had often been the case in the past. Private money or public money. He wanted commercial sponsors. And he thought that London should be the first $10 million match. And FIDE disappointed him with the offerings.
Again, he hijacked the match, essentially. I use that word strong terms.
But it's correct.
But he took the match. He played with Short. He crushed Short in their match. Meantime, FIDE continues to organize its own matches because it says we're legitimate. We're the legitimate
That's
organization.
right.
And the schism breaks out in the chess world. And that continues into Anand versus Kasparov. It played in New York in the World Trade Center. First game on 9/11 in 1995. I remember doing the commentary for that. And then 5 years pass before he finally plays Kramnik. And even that was crazy because Shirov had properly qualified
Exactly.
to play against him, but they couldn't get a financier
Right.
for Kasparov versus Shirov.
Right.
Instead, he plays against his student,
Vladimir
his old
Kramnik.
student, Vladimir Kramnik.
So there you have the problem from the schism from the World War II schism, which was like, who held the title? Whose property is the World Championship title? So FIDE's attitude was like, hey man, we're the official guys. It's ours. And prior to World War II, it was like, no, I'm the champion. I own the title. It's me. So Garry essentially, with the schism, was saying, no, the property's mine. I can go and do my own thing, and I'm going to play this guy, this guy, this guy. Except there came a problem. They were back to the old ways where the finances were becoming more and more problematic for Garry Kasparov.
It's funny because when you think about the age of the private world championships, that was the 1880s, the end of the 1880s and the early 1900s. It passed, and now we have the late 90s, and it's back to sort of private, even though Kasparov is trying to make it into something more of a commercial enterprise.
That's right.
And it really didn't work for him the way he wanted it to.
Absolutely not.
Especially since FIDE held their ground.
Exactly.
We're going to battle as much as possible. And then he faces Kramnik. And that was really a nightmare for him because he had been playing so well. He'd been the dominant player.
#1 player for 20 years.
How does he play a match, complete match against someone, and he doesn't win one game?
It's a question I have no answers for.
I mean, Kramnik was absolutely incredible in that match.
Yeah.
The Berlin defense is born.
He played out of his mind. He played the best chess of his life forever and ever. Amen. I happen to know on a personal level that Garry's going through a divorce, something that he never fell back on. He didn't use it as a crutch or an excuse. But I will genuinely say to you, he had his distractions, but you can't take it away. Kramnik won that match.
Kramnik wins the match. Kasparov never gets a rematch. He's
Never
frustrated,
allowed, yeah.
Retires
In 2005.
In 2005. Of course, the age of dominance of Kasparov is felt.
20 years.
20 years of #1, 15 years as champion, and goes down, as you say, as the greatest player of all time.
Yep.
I'm going to say, as Magic Johnson said about Michael Jordan, when he said, I'm the new sheriff in town, you ain't lying.
You ain't lying. I'm not arguing.
That was a bad man, and he will always be remembered as truly one of the greatest, if not the greatest ever.
Absolutely.